Hey, may I remove my jacket?
Okay, it's up to you. Get comfortable.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this very special Saturday and the final day of the Ethical Fashion Festival. I'm your virtual guide, Trey Renee Chambers, and let's start the day off right. Saturday morning kickoff with Casey. Casey will lead us in a 20-minute class that will include a breath awareness meditation and movements to awaken and align the body. And who knows, Casey may be offering a prize to one lucky winner. 10 a.m. is a very anticipated fireside chat. If you haven't heard Simone Cipriani speak, you will not want to miss out on this one. Head of the United Nations Ethical Fashion Initiative, Simone oversees the promotion of trade and incubation of creative micro enterprises within marginalized communities in Africa and Haiti. Simone enjoys speaking with students and, of course, industry professionals. So he has personally asked for a good portion of the attendance today to be Q&A. That is time set aside just so he can hear from you. And yet, there's more. Visit the agenda page to see the lineup, which includes some trivia games with Fashion Revolution. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like a whole lot of fun. And speaking of fun, joining us after the party is vintage queen and expert stylist Lou in Louland. Yes, now that would be the perfect time to whip up that pink margarita recipe from the Xena Gals. Check it out in the video gallery of this event app. Don't forget to visit the exhibition hall to view vendors participating in the pop-up shop and the digital coupons for the use for holiday shopping. I mean, come on, holiday shopping's right around the corner. In the event app, you will be able to access all of these coupons and deals after today. So you may still be able to log on and watch any sessions that you missed. And don't forget to check out Inside Fashion Design, where you can sign up on the website to stay in the know for future events and deals. And of course, for resources to support your design passions and career. The website is www.insidefashiondesign.com. Thank you so much for spending time with us. The vision of this event is to offer exposure to the folks striving for a better fashion industry through their brands, and of course, to build awareness for you, our attendees, so together we can all strive for a better tomorrow. Seriously, together we can make a difference. So, thank you again, and enjoy and be well.
Hey, thank you, Trey Renee, our virtual guide. So welcome everyone. This is day 3 of Ethical Fashion Festival and our much anticipated Saturday morning session with Simone Cipriani and Chloe, who are joining us from both in Geneva or?
Yes? In Geneva.
In Geneva, great. Great, and we have Eden Dawn, who will be our moderator today, and so they're going to have this great conversation. We really want you to ask questions, and you can use the Q&A on the Zoom or the chat through the Whova app, and we'll be monitoring those, so we really want to hear from you guys. So don't be shy, please ask questions, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Eden and Simone.
Well, thanks for having me on such an exciting morning. As we were talking about, it's 10 a.m. and I feel like we've already lived many lives today. And I think it's a wonderful time for us to be having this discussion, Simone, because as we were just saying, with this now historic presidential-elect winning ticket of people who have talked about climate change with Biden-Harris ticket and talked about trade, I think that we're going to see a lot of changes coming up soon. So maybe we should just begin at the beginning, especially assuming we have some students joining us, and talk about, sustainability is this huge word, but I have found in my years of being a fashion editor, it is a word that not many people actually understand what it means, right? Because there's so many angles to it. So when people talk to you about sustainability, how do you break that down for them?
Mamma mia, thanks a lot. First of all, I'm so thrilled to be here with you, Aidan, and with the team. and to be in Portland. We were supposed to be with you physically, in physical presence, and this COVID situation didn't allow it to happen. But sooner or later, we'll be able to come. I'm delighted to be with you all, and I'm delighted to be in the US, even if only virtually, because it's a historical moment. Sustainability. Sustainability is about being responsible for the world of tomorrow and being responsible for the world of today at the same time. Sustainability is that. Sustainability is about being responsible about the social and the environmental capital of the world in which we live. The social capital is given by the networks of collaboration, of good collaboration among people, and by a constant strive to reduce inequality. Environmental capital, you know it better than me. It's about fighting climate change. It's about capping emissions according to the Paris agreements, but it's about also being responsible in our daily life, in the daily operations of a company, or in the daily lives of ourselves, about our behavior, because everything we do impacts on the environment and on the environmental capital. I use the word capital because it's a capital. It's an asset that we have. And once we deplete this asset, we are lost. It's lost. It's lost forever. It's an asset that gets depreciated very, 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 very fast until the end of its useful life. We've got to avoid that. This is for the environment, but it's the same for society. We work a lot in places where there is war. We work in many African countries where unfortunately there is conflict, there is war. We work in Afghanistan, and we have seen what are the consequences of the destruction of society, destruction brought about by any form of conflict, where people are not able to interact harmoniously anymore, where violence is rampant, where inequality is huge, and so on. Once you destroy a society, bringing it together, bringing it back together takes a very long while. Somebody said, to build a country, to build a healthy society, it takes centuries. To destroy it, it takes just a war. It's extremely quick. Destroying is quick. Building is slow, time-consuming, but it pays back. It pays back in an incredible way. So sustainability is about addressing these two issues, which in practical terms in the fashion industry means the place of people in the supply chains, people to be properly paid, work which is organized according to decent conditions of work, no discrimination, all the conditions of work that are enshrined in the Declaration of the Human Rights and in the International Bill of Human Rights, because you know the International Bill of Human Rights also speak about the importance of work, of good working conditions, and so on, and so no discrimination.
Let's stay on number one for a minute, because I think that that's really important. And there has been such a perception, at least here, I think in America for a long time, that sustainable fashion is about things like using bamboo fabric, but it's really like just material based. And this concept of sustainability being so tied with human rights is you can't have one without the other. And how do we educate people more on that? Or do you think that that awareness is growing? Because I don't think that it was something people thought of initially when they thought about sustainable fashion.
Awareness is growing, but it's never enough. Human rights are the foundation of the free world, and human rights are universal. Are universal because every human being is entitled to them just for the fact of being human. Human rights are also interrelated and interdependent. If one human right is violated, another one gets depleted. And this happens also in work, in the supply chains. So Human rights are an international consensus on what constitutes a life of decency, a decent life. This applies also to work. In the supply chains, respect of the human rights means, advancement of human rights means that people are entitled to decent conditions of work, to conditions of work that allow them to flourish in their own life and to live decently. This implies a proper wage, a living wage. This envisages also, implies also all the other criteria: no discrimination, paying of overtime, and health and safety, everything. This is the foundation of good business, of responsible business, of socially conscious business. Then you have the environmental side, and you are right, Eden. You are right when you mention bamboo, and it's a clever point, because the environmental impact starts with the raw materials. Mm-hmm. You know that the industry has a huge carbon footprint. The emissions of the industry measured in CO2 equivalents of greenhouse gases emissions are, somebody says they are around 2.7 billion tons of that. To stay on the Paris Agreement, to cap climate change, they should be cut to 1.1 billion tons. So it's a huge cut. And the 60% of these emissions happen in the raw materials, in sourcing raw materials, and in the first transformations of raw materials. So raw materials are important. It's a moment already where a lot of carbon footprint is generated. Just a simple thing: organic cotton is much less impactful also in terms of CO2 than conventional cotton. To give you an example, there are materials that are, wool can be very environmental friendly, but there is the problem of the animals and all the rest. So raw materials, then the first transformation, the second transformation, this is where you accumulate that. And in this transformation, you have the place of people, because you have people at work in the factories. So it's where the human rights are important. So you see the two things, the environment and the human rights, are interrelated. And also in the human rights, the right to a clean and proper environment is one of the human rights, because without a clean environment, you cannot live decently. These things are part of each other. As I said, they are interrelated and interdependent. Another point is about the consumption of what we buy. The first block of issues on environmental sustainability and social sustainability is in the supply chain. Then it's after the sales on how we treat these things, how often we wash them, if we are able to buy things that last, if we mend, repurpose, recycle, swap our clothes instead of dumping them. And this extension of the life cycle of what we buy is extremely important, this to reduce this. I think that in a few years' time, circular economy, even in this, will be huge, and particularly in the swapping, in the repurposing of garments. Somebody says 1 out of 5 garments exchanged will be an existing one, repurposed and exchanged again.
And it seems to me here on this topic, I think that, again, an area that attitudes are really shifting, particularly in the fashion community. You know, it was like a bit of a shocking thing when I would tell people as a fashion editor that I was wearing things secondhand, or that I do clothing rental. And I don't know why that would be shocking, because I know the impact. And I think that these are these little things that, you know, consumers can do. And that's another area that we're working on, educating people. You know, the amount of people who don't know how to sew a button on to a shirt, and so they throw it away, is a shocking.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. And you are an innovator, by the way, if you do what you have just said. You are an innovator because this is the world of tomorrow.
Oh, I like it.
It's absolutely that. It's a world in which probably some big fashion brand in some of their retail space will put up a place with stitching machines and with tailors to repurpose the garments that people that were sold by the brand. This is something which has to become part of our daily lives. I am old enough. The joke I used to do when in conferences with students in New York in the US was during the First World War, and I'm not so old, but I'm old enough to have seen a world in which people didn't go much to shops, but they used to go to tailors. That was my mother. My mother sold fabric. She came from a family of people in the fabric trade, and she always went to a tailor, to a seamstress, to get her things done. And I've seldom seen my mother going to a shop to buy a brand or to buy something, but her things are still there. Mm-hmm. And he has people to repurpose and so on, and This is coming back. This is coming back, the repurposing, the regeneration, this is coming back. And this is also a responsibility for us when we buy. Another thing, when we buy, and it's a responsibility also for the shop attendant, if you are in a physical retail space, or as it is now normal, if you are online, it's the responsibility of the sales platform to tell the story of the product and to give the right information on the product. What material it is, what are the properties of the material? Mm-hmm. Is it long lasting and why? How you should do the maintenance? What are the key issues in maintenance for this piece of garment, for this accessory? And then the story behind the product. Who made it? How it was made? Were the working conditions respected? Was the impact on the environment of the making of this offset or reduced? All these things are extremely important, extremely important. Take a bag. We make bags for many brands. We make fabric, we make some garments, we make jewelry, we used to make hats, we make some shoes, we make a lot of stuff in our supply chain. We are makers, you know, we coordinate large supply chain of artisans in many places in the global south, especially in Africa and in Afghanistan. Take a bag, one of our bags, a Vivian Westwood bag we make. The inside, the lining is a recycled shirt. Mm-hmm. You know, these second-hand shirt, these second-hand garments sent by charities to Africa. Mm-hmm. We buy them, repurpose, clean, it becomes the lining of a bag. The external part of a bag may be a piece of canvas which is new, or a piece of canvas which is a tent from the safari industry, which is recycled. Or in another case, the sail of a dhow, a sailing boat of the Swahili coast. And then the studs and all the metal fittings are made with recycled metal that are cast, that are melted and then cast again into these studs and so on. This bag is at the very beginning very it's a sustainable bag, but this bag then is built in such a way that the stitching and the single pieces are very simple and straightforward, and it can be repaired by whoever. Mm-hmm. Whoever with a stitching machine or with a heavy-duty stitching machine, if there is a piece of rubber and so on, whoever can repair it. So much so that I see people who bought this bag 10 years ago who go around with it freely. Sustainability is also another thing. Sustainability is design.
Yeah.
The way in which you design a product, it's the way in which this product becomes sustainable. Sustainability starts in design. Design is about sustainability. I always tell the students in design schools, you've got to learn how things are made so that and the property of the materials and everything about sustainability around that, so that when you design, when you conceive a product, you make it sustainable from the very beginning. Design is the starting point of sustainability.
So before we get, because I do think it's important, we should talk about sustainability from a couple of different angles. And we've touched on the consumer, and I think we should about people in the fashion industry. But before we get into there, I want to circle back to this thing you said that I think is so eloquent and so simple. And that is about knowing the story of your brand, and the story of your product. If you have so little of a relationship with your clothing that you can't tell me anything about it, if you don't know who made it, if you don't know where the materials came from, if you don't know how it was created, you don't know enough about your clothing. And that's such a simple idea, because I think it can be a very overwhelming thing, right? We all get overwhelmed when we have to, if you go, I'm going to eat healthier now. Well, like, what does that mean? That's such an overwhelming concept. But if you start at this thing of just like, maybe I'm not going to eat processed foods. I'm only going to make everything from scratch. That's an easy, concrete idea. And the idea of, do you know the story of your clothes, is a very simple one. And I think that consumers can adopt, because maybe the whole story of that bag made with recycled shirts. I got this dress from a designer in town named Holly Stalder. So it's very easy. My dress was just made by Holly, so getting
Absolutely.
to have that. And if you walk into these giant, huge fast fashion brands and you pick up the thing, you don't know enough about that brand.
You don't know anything exactly. And in the area of web sales, of online sales, which are bigger and bigger, and which is the future, it's easy on a web platform to tell the story of a product. It's more difficult to train all the sales attendants in all the shops of a brand all over the world about the story. But putting the story on a web platform is relatively simple. It's a matter of having a system to track all the processes and to be transparent about that. It's absolutely true. Then there are the businesses of proximity. You go to a friend, you go to a tailor in your own town, and you make your own things, and you know everything about that. You may buy a fabric from a fabric shop or from an online platform where they tell you where this fabric was made, what were the materials into the fabric, if it is cotton, if it is wool, if it is a synthetic fabric, if it is viscose, whatever it is, and what's the impact of that. It's also a pleasure to do some research around shopping. Shopping is beautiful when you also do some research. You go on your phone and you check, it's this material. What is that? It's this kind of vicuña. It comes from South America. What is that? Let me check. It comes from the Alps. It comes from here. It comes from da. And you can make your act of shopping a social act, a social and a research act, and therefore fun, because it's about exchanging information, it's about doing research, it's about swapping, it's about lending, it becomes a moment of social interaction. And
fun to talk about, for sure. When somebody asks you a question of, where do you get that bag? It's
absolutely
more entertaining to be like, oh my gosh, my bag is made from mushroom leather and they're making all these advances and this thing. Or, we have a giant clothing, like the biggest clothing swap in the Northwest here once a year, where people bring bags of their old clothes and then you get to leave with a bag of new clothes. And
yes,
things are so entertaining versus, just I found it at Walmart, and it's like, that's not fun.
It's fun. Shopping becomes fun and becomes a social act. An interaction becomes something that, as we were saying at the very beginning of this conversation, brings society back together again. Shopping becomes an act of building social capital.
Yeah.
The capacity to stay together, to interact, to build something together. You should see but now I'm going to speak about things about wars. I have to shut myself up.
Well, I do think it's also an interesting time, as so many of us obviously are still quarantined, being in a global pandemic. And we've seen this rise, and I'm not sure how much it's happened where you are, but everybody, a lot of bread making and a lot of people getting into all of these hobbies while they're trapped at home. And I just I see more knitters, and I see more, people in embroidery. And for me, and obviously I'm biased, but it just tickles me. I want people to be excited about making clothing, or even just, you know, creating something individual. I think it's so cool when people buy like an old Levi's jacket at a, you know, flea market, but then they embroider it up to make it their own. It's just, to me, like, that's what fashion is. It's that individuality, and the putting your love into something creates a garment that's never going to be the same as getting it, you know, off a giant sales rack.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if there is a moment in which you can perfect some skills, and if you can learn some new skill around that, it's this unfortunate moment which on the other side gives you this possibility. Here in Geneva, I am in Geneva, I sit in Geneva in Switzerland, because our office of the UN is here in Geneva. And Geneva this evening was announced to be the worst COVID place in Western Europe. It seems that it's rampant. It's rampant here. Notwithstanding this COVID, our colleagues, our teams, the artisans we work with all over Western Africa, in Eastern Africa, in Afghanistan, are at work. And I keep on seeing on our virtual platforms the products. Recently, last week, I saw some incredible shawls made in silk and in Afghanistan, and then printed by a luxury fabric company in Italy, which is called Ratti, which is the supplier of luxury fabric to all the big brands. So it's amazing to see that in this moment of disruption, in this moment of pandemic, people are incredibly resilient. And in the global south, in places where people are much more marginalized and disadvantaged, they live really in disadvantaged conditions. Nevertheless, they react to this with an incredible strength. And it's amazing to see this. One day we'll get out of this pandemic, the humankind will be able to find a vaccine and then to find treatment and all the rest. For the moment, we have to follow all the precautions, distancing, masks, protect ourselves, blah, 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 blah. But one day we'll get out, and that day we will see the world flourishing again, maybe in a different way, with more consciousness, with better use of online possibilities and so on. But in that moment, you will see more and more of this sustainability in shopping, in the fashion industry. And I think this pandemic has been a drill that has led us to focus on the essentials, on the fundamentals of our lives, which is our common life, which is our mutual interaction, which is the future of the environment in which we live. And with this globalization, with the global supply, fashion is one of the global supply chains that has spread the COVID. Because fashion supply chain is global, it spans from China to India, to Europe, to the US, to everywhere. And fashion is one of those global value chains. Maybe we'll see more of regional supply chains. But we'll have to learn to manage these global value chains, these global supply chains, in order for them to produce something good for the humankind, and not only to be vehicle of transmission of these global pandemics and all the rest.
Right. I think it's a good time for us, you know, talking about global supply chains and global pandemic. It's, you know, you work with these groups all over the world. You're not centralized in one area. And no. I think that that's a really important thing for us to talk about. And why does sustainability need to be a global effort? And why is it important for you with the Ethical Fashion Initiative to work with these groups all over?
We work in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Ivory Coast. We just started working in Benin. We are going to work in Niger. We used to work in Ghana. We are going back to Ghana. This is Western Africa. Then we work in Eastern Africa. We work in Kenya. We work in Uganda. Central Eastern Africa. We work in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the area of the Virunga. We work in, and this is Central Eastern Africa, and then we work in Afghanistan, especially in Eastern Afghanistan. Then we work a bit in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan to source materials to Afghanistan, but it's Afghanistan the focus. We used to work until a short while ago in Haiti, and I hope we will be back there. So this is where we work. We are trying to work in Eritrea now. In between in Ethiopia, there's a civil war broke. It's a difficult moment. In Mali, there's an insurgency. Burkina is with the problem of Islamic terrorism and insurgency. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, where we work close to the Virunga, there are many security issues. In the north of Uganda, where we work, it's full of refugees from South Sudan, and we work with them. We work in urban slums in Nairobi, in the capital of Kenya, and then in marginalized rural communities. In Afghanistan, there is war. So why do I say this? I say this to say that we work in these places because by putting people together, by not putting, because we don't put, by allowing people to get together in a structured environment, in a proper environment to work and to have decent work, we help them to recreate the famous social capital of their society, the capacity to interact together and to work together, to strive together for the future of their country. These are the building blocks of a society. So in a certain sense, we go to places where these building blocks have been divided and scattered around, and we allow them to get back together and to form together the shape they were before. By doing this, we have to take care of the environmental sustainability, because in many of these places we use local natural resources and we interact also with the producers of natural resources. We grow silk and saffron. We also produce saffron together. We grow organic cotton and all the rest. So we do this because inequality is one of the big problems of the world of today. And inequality is not only inside the country, which is already there and which is serious, but it's also on a global scale. There is a good deal of the humankind that doesn't have the possibility to get to a decent life. And there are societies that are disrupted and that need to be helped to get back together. This is a factor of stability for the world of today, a factor of stability also for the world, for the privileged world in which we live, in the global north, in Europe, in the US, in Japan. We live in a relatively comfortable world, but it's a world which is threatened by the instability and by the inequality that in a way or another we and this system nurtures in the other side of the world. In Europe, we are obsessed by the problem of migration from Africa, from the Middle East, this huge wave of refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, and of economic irregular migrants from Africa. But these are people who run away from war. These are people who run away from lack of opportunities. And these are people who run away to look for a decent life. It's inequality, it's this instability that brings that about. So by investing in these places with work linked to the supply chain of fashion, because this is work that requires basic skills that are available everywhere, cutting, stitching, beading, embroidery. By doing this, we give our contribution to that and to what the United Nations call, and that's another thing of the United Nations along with the human rights, they call Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are the goals of the humankind for a decent future for everybody. And they regard the environment, they regard the way in which we work together, they regard the empowerment of women and all the rest. And talking about empowerment of women, you have the first woman vice president in the United States today, and a woman of color. And this is something extremely beautiful for the whole of the world and for the future of the humankind.
Of course, I could not be more excited. I'm thrilled that I stopped crying enough to be able to interview you. So that was a good thing for the morning at 9:30ish or so. I wasn't sure if that was going to happen, but I want to connect this with what you just talked about and the importance of working with these communities and helping them build up, you know, a better life for themselves and some autonomy, it sounds like, and then connecting it with the bigger fashion names we know, right? So I know that you just hit your 10-year anniversary working with Vivian Westwood, right?
Yes.
And how does that, let's talk a little bit about how we connect those dots from that, you know, a more creative thinking for a supply chain, but also why it's important to pull in some of these very recognizable and, you know, beloved brands, and what that does for the sustainable fashion movement to have these huge names that we know and look up to taking that stand and saying, we are going to prioritize this.
The brands were useful for us, has been useful for us to have a market and to become part of a regular, a stable, a permanent supply chain that pays decently. It's not to be taken for granted, because not every brand in the whole fashion industry pays decently their suppliers. The brands with which we engaged accepted our level of remuneration of labor, our level of prices. So that was the first step forward. Partners who accepted to remunerate labor well, partners who accepted to give us work regularly every season, because continuity is one of the key factors when you intervene in these societies. A society that has been broken up by war, conflict, or poverty, or lack of opportunity takes a very long while to get back together, a very long while. So continuity is extremely important. And an established brand has continuity because it's always on the market and is almost sure to remain on the market. A small emerging brand, which is important, I do not say anything bad about them, but may fail, may disappear. You need continuity. You need continuity, decent remuneration of work, you need that. The other point is that we needed also the recognition of the brands to pass a message to consumers, because along with the product, we sell our impact assessment reports that tell the story behind the product. Who made the product, how it was made, what's the impact on the local community, what's the environmental impact. And to convey this to consumers, we needed the channels of communication, of information of the brands, because they have retail places, because they have platforms. And when we started 10 years ago, that was the safest way to go at the very beginning and to become recognized. Because the more you work with brand, the more you are recognized by other brands and by consumers, the more people come to source from you. I give you an example. We made for some seasons, for a while we made, and now we are discussing again some products for Adidas. And the fact that we were working for Adidas brought us to work with another big brand, because they said, if you are able to work for this kind of giant company, so structured with very serious sourcing procedures and so on, then you are able also to work in there. Vivian is the classic example. She started working with us. You know, the story of how we started working with Vivian Westwood is incredible, because me and another person who used to work with us, whose name is Jeremy Brown, a friend of Chloe and of mine. Chloe was already there with us. We one day introduced ourselves at the place of Vivian in her main office. Those days it was in Conduit Street in London, now it's another place, with a big box, which we used to call the coffin, a long black box. And that box was full of all the skills of all the products that we were able to make. And we presented ourselves. The box came from Kenya. We came from Kenya like this, carrying the box, and then ringing the bell. They knew that we were coming. They knew the UN was coming. So what is the UN?
Carrying a giant coffin.
Yeah, and the UN introduced itself with this coffin. And then we said, who are you? We are the UN with the coffin. And let me see what you have. And the dialogue started like that. Then after some seasons, she said, okay, I want to come and I want to see. She came with all her design team and with Jürgen Teller, a great fashion photographer, and they did an incredible photo shoot, a whole campaign in the slums where we worked, or in the very marginalized rural communities where we used to work. And she's never missed a single season. Every season, her team calls our team in Kenya, and together we define the product, we do the product development. They know what we can do. When we have new materials from our fabric productions in Western Africa, they see these materials. They include these materials in the design. That's why I say sustainability starts with design. And every season we started to. They adjusted the price levels to make provision for our price level, to pay people decently and all the rest. And we started like that. And we are still there. Now we would like to do something. Now we would like also to have a direct dialogue with consumers in a way or another, because we are, the margins that you can realize as a producer are bigger if you go to sell directly to consumers.
Of course,
So
retail.
We want to keep our work with the brands. We want to keep it because this is our bread and butter. Because with some of these brands we have gratitude. Vivian Westwood, United Arrows, now in Japan, Mimco in Australia, a great partner. Sarah Robbins, their CEO, a good friend. And then also Ratti in Italy, the giant of textile. And then all the others that were with us in the past, Stella McCartney and Adidas and Idun, when Idun was there in New York, and many other ones. Now we work with Lewe of the Vuitton Group. We work again with Camper. We work with many of them. We have gratitude for them. But we want also to create a small line of work on the side that doesn't disturb, that doesn't create problems on this business to business line of work, something business to consumer, because it's time for the designers, the African designers that work with us, for the producers, for the social enterprise that we have created in Africa. It's time to really get access to a different level of margin, to a different capacity to generate profit and cash, and therefore to be fully sustainable and independent. The first enterprise we created in Kenya 10 years ago is now a private company that walks on its own legs, that is financially sustainable.
I'm excited to see where that goes. I want to.
Mamma mia, yes. We wanted to present this in Portland. Now there is the COVID, because the idea was to come and present the first products in Portland.
Oh,
so maybe we do it together when this finishes.
Yeah.
When this pandemic finishes.
This summer. Let's cross our fingers for this summer.
Yes, let's cross our fingers for next summer.
Before we move to some Q&A talk, I want us to touch on the idea, because I know we have a lot of students here that are just, beginning their journey into the fashion industry. And, some in my years of teaching fashion students, it's such a mix. Many are looking forward to going after some of these big name brands that we know. Many are interested in trying their own path and, potentially working on their own. How do you encourage, or maybe this is a bigger question for how do we all encourage these younger people to take steps towards sustainability in their work? Is it that they, can encourage the brands that they go to work at to move that way? I'm just trying to think about how we empower them as young people to move the dial continuously that direction.
I'll give two suggestions. One is a boring one. Learn a bit of the language, the basics, just the basics of the language of accounting and the logic of accounting, so that you have a clear idea of the cost dimension of your work and of your proposals, and how these costs are framed in the wider structure of the department where you work, where you are going to work. This is extremely important. Because if you have to give a suggestion, And if you are able to frame this suggestion, also you don't need to be a financial analyst, but if you are able to frame this suggestion also in the language of accounting of costs, and you help your manager to manage their budgets, to manage their margins, to manage their return on capital employed, which is assigned, which is requested as a target to that department. So that's one. It's boring, I know it, but it's useful. It's
Money
very,
talks.
yes. The second one is do not be shy. I know this is difficult too, but ask. And ask one question, which is why? Why do not we try also this? This could be more sustainable because this and that, and the costing is this. Sometimes the costing of a sustainable solution is higher, but then you can frame also the market that this sustainable solution can bring about, or you can open a discussion. So do not be shy. Ask why do we not do this? Why do we not use this material? Is it true? Is this the way to go? Is this a long-term decision or something we do now? And if you meet resentment from your supervisor, from your manager, you just candidly say, hey, I say this to give my contribution. I want to be useful. I say this in a honest, open way. I'm here to learn. Surely you know more than me. Surely. But by asking to you, I have the possibility to have this discussion and to learn. Dialogue is the way through which we grow. Dialogue. Dia, logos, Greek, ancient Greek, words, a discourse, a reasoning that shuttles in between 2 points. Monologue, monos, logos, one talk, one direction. It doesn't work. Dialogo, dialogos, and be afraid. And then when you go out, when you get out of work, get informed, remain updated on what goes on in materials, in market trends. I have a bias of a producer, so I'm always on materials and so on, but in market trends, in what people want, have a social life, because the more you have a social life, the more you know what people want. And then do not be afraid of changing. Do not be afraid of being different. Difference is beautiful. If you want, if you want to address people by staying like this, lying down on the floor, do that. Don't be shy. Do what you want. Be who you are. Be who you are by asking the questions that you have, by challenging the existing in a positive way, always in a positive way, always in a contribution spirit, and know the cost and the revenue dimension of what you do. Know something about the basics of accounting.
I think that I love that idea of questioning why. And I think, as you stated, not in an interrogation way, but in a curious way, in a just like, hey, I'm broaching this topic. And I think that that actually works also for consumers. Going back to, what we said earlier, as consumers, it can be something as simple as asking your brand, emailing them and saying, why don't you have your supply chain on your website? Why don't we know more? Like, I would love to know more about where you're sourcing stuff. And there are some things that people are, not comfortable for sharing for competition reasons or whatever. But I think that idea of coming at it with this curious thing of like, I would love to know this. I also think that a lot of brands know their internal story and aren't good at telling that to their consumer.
Brava, exactly. And maybe you as a young staff, a student who just is hired by the brand, who loves the brand, who understands the story of the brand, is able to give suggestions on how to tell the story properly. Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Love your work, love what you do.
you know, these brands that think like, oh, well, everyone knows that we prioritize sustainability or we only work with blah, blah, blah. And it's like, no, nobody from the outside knows that.
No, it's not true. It's true. You're right. You're absolutely right. Look at that painting there, up there. There are holes on the canvas, holes. Mm-hmm. In those days, when this was produced, people didn't practice a hole on the canvas. What is a canvas is to paint, not to make a hole in it. But a group of artists started making holes. So they created from a bidimensional thing, they created a three-dimensional thing. So they opened, by practicing those holes, they opened their minds to a new dimension. And this is where evolution in that thing of contemporary art came. So open your mind. Practice holes. When you find yourself in front of a canvas, a bidimensional canvas in your work, practice your holes. Dig a hole and see the reality behind. Get to another dimension and don't be scared of doing this, but the boring old man, a bit of accounting.
I don't think anyone has called you a boring old man in your entire life. I feel very confident.
My daughters sometimes.
Daughters don't count, not in that case. Britta and Trish, should we move into some questions?
Yes, let's do that. Trish has a handful of questions from some students, and Jim is getting questions through our chat here. So Trish, where should we start? Jim, why don't we start with you, but you'll need to unmute. There we go.
All right, so some questions are coming in from our audience. We have two that are related from Becca and from Anna about what resources you would recommend for new designers coming into the field to learn more about sustainability. And what do you, if I combine both of their questions together, so what resources would you recommend? And then also, what do you see as the prospect for young designers coming in terms of being able to advocate and have their voices be heard, you know, to be a louder voice as a new designer? What would be your recommendation on both of those? Resource and then how to get their voice heard?
For the first point, take pleasure in reading more on the origin of materials and on the property of materials. Know materials, that's the starting point. And touch materials. Know materials with your mind, with your eyes, with your hands. With your hands. I remember once we organized a fashion show with a brand we used to collaborate with. And this fashion show, Chloe remembers that because she organized that in Milano Fashion Week. And Armani gave us their space because to this fashion brand because they wanted to support an emerging fashion brand. It was a moment of an act of generosity. And then people told him, hey, you know, these people here of the EFI and this emerging brand, it was Stella Jean, they use a lot of fabric from Africa. You should see this fabric. The story of the fabric is beautiful. The fabric is cotton, is made like this, is made like this. And the guy said, yes, but I have to touch it. Mr. Armani, I remember this. I have to touch it. I've always seen good designers with their hands on materials. I know designers who close their eyes like this, touch different materials and tell you what they are. I know people who smell a piece of leather and tell you what it is. I know people who know wool. There is some polyester. My mother was like this. She was not a designer. There is some polyester in it. But no, mommy, it's not. There is some polyester in it, and it was true. So first thing, know the materials, touch them, and know the property of the materials, and know, and that's the most difficult, what's the carbon footprint of these materials. Some materials require more fertilizers that produce a lot of nitrogens, with nitrogen, which is a greenhouse gas, or they need pesticides that produce a lot of CO2, that need a lot of CO2 to be produced, or some materials sequestrate CO2 better than other materials. because they are plants and know the materials, know the implant, know this. This is a good starting point. Then know the process of making. But this you will learn in your school, you will know something about how things are made. But if you start from the materials and the first transformation, that's already a very good point. The decarbonization of the supply chain starts with the material. Then on how being heard, what I said before, go in with a constructive spirit of asking. Ask, and say, I love to ask because I love to learn. And by asking, by showing your willingness to learn and to engage, it's where you also put your proposals. Because asking established a dialogue. And when you have a dialogue, you can pass also your proposals. It's difficult. It's not easy. People are stressed in this industry. People are stressed by very short timing, production time, PD time, lead times, People are all stressed. People in my age, look at myself. I have a white beard. I look like Santa Claus. We are all stressed. But ask, engage, create a dialogue. And the dialogue you create through asking. I'm here to learn. I learn from you. You have the experience. You have something that I value, which is knowledge. And by doing this, you bring in your own contribution, because young people have a lot to give to this industry. They have a different vision of the world. They have a different idea about the future. They have a different eye, a different capacity to see things. They have something to say. And people in my generation have a lot to learn from young designers. There's a young designer whom I mention here, whom I admire. She's created a small brand. The brand is Zazie Vintage, and the designer is Jean de Crone. I admire Jean. She's a person from whom every time I meet her, I learn. Every time I meet Jean, I learn. The last time I saw her, it was during the summer. I took the car because of the pandemic, so we couldn't travel. I went by car to see her distancing and the masks and all the rest. And she lives on a houseboat on a canal in Amsterdam. And I was so impressed by what I saw. I saw her workshop. I saw where she invents all her ideas. She's a person who has created a sustainable brand that gives work to a lot of people in India, to us in Afghanistan. She's a person with solutions, with ideas that I've never imagined. And she came with those ideas. She came to look for me. She came to look for me saying, I want to work with you. So you young people, young designers, you are great. You have a lot to give, much more than what you think. Do not be shy, establish a dialogue. Jean came to me and said, I want to work with you because I have something to give to you and I have a lot to get from you. And here we are.
I want to touch on that too, in that I think from interviewing so many brands for a quarter of my life now, that a lot of people operate just out of legacy habits. The companies operate out of the ways that they have been operating, and such a way to show that you can come in as a new person and potentially pitch new ideas, or at least get them thinking, is a way you really bring value to the team. You really can.
I completely agree. Challenging the existing is the way in which you progress. You bring about progress. Challenging the existing. Recently, some months ago, I read a novel by Laila Slimani, a French author of Moroccan origin. She lives in Paris. She writes beautifully in a beautiful French, and it's a novel about a French woman who marries a Moroccan soldier who fights for the French army in the Second World War, and then she goes to Morocco to live, and she finds herself in a male chauvinist society, and in just after the Second World War, and in a place where people don't want to change the old attitudes. And whenever she says, hey, but why don't we do this? They answer, ici c'est comme ça. Here it is like that. This answer, you will get it so many times, but this is the answer that blocks progress. So this is the only answer you cannot accept, as this is the one that you have to challenge, as I said before, with your why. It's like that. Why? Because it's always been like that since the days of the pyramids. No, since when the company was founded. So it's 30 years ago. How long is the history of the humankind? Some millennia. What are 30 years in this time span? Nothing. So it's always been like that in a very short time span. Can't we think it in a different way? Put things in perspective. Put things in perspective, and don't be and never conflict. Never you are wrong. Never conflict. Always why, and laughing. Laugh of yourself. Laugh of things. There is nothing like a good laugher that good laugh that can change things for the better. So these are, I know that these look very generic suggestions, but it's also the experience of my life when I was young. When Chloe and I, Chloe is there, when Chloe and I, now I'll tell you a story about Chloe. Now, when Chloe and I, we started the Ethical Fashion Initiative, at the very beginning, people used to tell us, it's impossible. It's impossible that you become producers of these things from this kind of artisans. Why? Because the industry works in a different way. Because here it is like that. And we simply said, why? And nobody supplied a good answer. So we did it, and here we are. I first met Chloe, she's still very young, as you see, but she was extremely young, and she was working for a fashion magazine in Uganda, in Kampala. I had just got out of all my tours in the slums of Nairobi, in Kenya. Then I had arrived in Kampala. I was in awful condition, all filthy. I had slept in shacks, in things. And I introduced myself. Hello, I work for the UN. And Chloe said, you work for the UN? Yeah, she said, I do work for the UN. Yeah, I would like you to come to work with us. Yeah, can I see a proof of you? So I had to show my UN passport to her, but she challenged me. And she's been challenging me since then, and I challenge her, and we challenge each other. And out of our dialogue, we have the Ethical Fashion Initiative of today. Everything proceeds from dialogue and challenging. And nothing, I repeat, it's like this. It's always been like this. These are not answers. These are ways to kill the dialogue. The dialogue, two ways, becomes a monologue, one way.
I love it.
So
before we move on, I just wanted to pop in one other suggestion for early resources. If you're just learning about sustainability for the first time, I think the book Overdressed, The Shockingly High Price of Fast Fashion, is just a really good intro into the, so that's one I would recommend.
Right.
Yeah, it's one real easy kind of read that is enough to slap you in the face. Is how I
absolutely true. In the US, you have a lot of online education on also on accounting, basic accounting. Understand your accounts. It's easy. It takes a few weeks, and it's extremely useful.
I like to say entrepreneurship, maybe just
entrepreneurship. Absolutely, Trish, you are right, Trish. Bloody good suggestion.
Especially
that's a very good suggestion. Yes, you are right.
Entrepreneurship is easier on the designer.
Yes, you are absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Trish. Thanks.
Want to hit me with another? Hit us with another question.
Yeah, we've got a couple of more. This, since you mentioned, some of the work that was being done by Ethical Fashion Initiative, there's two questions related to EFI here. One was related to coming from an attendee here that says there was some years ago there was an effort to start work in Palestine. What is happening with that project?
Yeah, there wasn't a real effort. We went to Palestine. We went to the West Bank, Chloe and I, and we went to meet a group of refugees who used to work, who still work on embroidery. And, we work with we need two inputs when we work. One input is some money for the initial investment, and this comes from institutional donors, the states or the other international organizations. And the other, because you need to do investments in a place, you have to create a structure, an infrastructure, a place for work and everything. And the second one is the market, to find skills that can be transformed into products for which we find a market. We didn't find a market for those embroidery. We didn't find the donor for that in those days, and we didn't follow up. It was just one visit. It's one of those things. There are more than one. There is more than one. There is more than one place where this has happened. Many years ago, we also got engaged for something of the UN in the middle of the Pacific Ocean on a small island. There was a problem there in the Vanuatu Islands, and it didn't fly. And Papua New Guinea didn't fly because of the market and all the rest. To tell you the truth, that of Palestine remains in a deep part of my heart, because what we saw prompted all our feelings, and we would really like to be back there and to work, as we would really like to be back in Haiti, to make the hats we used to make in this very small community of women in the middle of nowhere on the mountains. An incredible place, incredible people. So that's my answer.
Great. And the follow-up to that from another one of our attendees is, the collaboration with other fashion initiatives and social enterprises and even other government agencies. What are some of those collaborations that you might be able to share in terms of who EFI is currently working with?
Sorry, I was thinking about, we don't work in Palestine, but we have a Palestinian designer who works with us. We hire Palestinian designers. Sorry, I was distracted to think about this. You said international organizations and?
Other initiatives or social enterprises or other government agencies that might collaborate with you on this to help further the cause.
So we work a lot. Our main funder, the main provider of funds for our investment in capacity building, our initial investment, our social investments, and all the rest is the European Union. The European Union is the main partner of the Ethical Fashion Initiative, which is a UN agency, which is called the ITC, International Trade Center. But the main donor, the main support is the European Union. We used to work also with single governments. We've worked for a while with the Japanese government, with the Swiss government, with the German government, with the Norwegian government, and we've worked in Haiti with the US government under the Obama administration, and it was a great pleasure. And we work with other with NGOs, with other social enterprises, and the more we are, the more we collaborate, the better it is. It has to have, at the level of social enterprises, when you talk business, social business, but it has to have a market dimension. This is very important. We are always aiming at a market dimension, and then it has to be meaningful from the point of view of the revenues, the margins, and all the rest. It has to be, every collaboration has to be framed as a business plan. Otherwise, even if it is a beautiful collaboration, it doesn't fly. We tried in the past to collaborate with other social enterprises, and both sides, us and them, we were not able to produce good business concepts. Now we are more mature. You see this from the white in my beard, and we may go back to some of them with better business propositions. But yes, we're open. We are absolutely open. And the more there are of these things all over the world, the better it is.
That sounds great. Hey, let me finish up with
we also collaborate with the Aspen Institute and with the Artisan Alliance of the Aspen Institute, which is a beautiful initiative whose head is the mythical Peggy Clark, a vice president at the Aspen Institute. She's created this beautiful alliance of people who want to support artisan businesses all over the world. I say this because I really love their work. I really love Peggy and her work.
Sounds great. Then that leads right into this question from Genevieve in terms of what are some of the biggest challenges you face when it comes to marketing of designer products that EFI supports?
Oh, mamma mia. Mamma
mia. Just choose one.
Choose one. So one issue is always, as we are business to business now, is always the relationship with our buyer and the definition of the levels of prices. Prices are always an issue.
And Simone, how much of that is educating them on the process?
By being transparent on what you have, what you do, and having transparent costing and saying, listen, this is the costing if you want to do things properly. Do you want me to have a margin? Do you want me to work without a margin? Do you want these people to work without a life? So it's being transparent. It's a very difficult. Now it's less difficult because now we know our trade. Now we know what to do. We know how to speak. But at the very beginning, it was very difficult. I remember the manager of a big brand once that doesn't work with us anymore, who told me, hey, but in China, I have a factory and people are paid less. And I said, yes, but you have a state in China that gives a public school, housing, healthcare, clean water. Here, a person has to pay for everything. If you want clean water, you have to pay. If you want healthcare, you have to pay. If you want in Africa, so it's a different setting. First point first. The life has different costs. The cost of living here is different. It looks poorer than China, but poor people needs to spend more money there. And then the other point is the productivity of the two different situations. There you have a huge industrial plant that allows people to be productive. Here you do not. So you have to have a dialogue around. That's the first difficulty. The second difficulty is framing the story for consumers, because you need people in the communication and marketing department on the other side who perfectly understand what you do. And in the case of Westwood, of Mimco, of United Arrows, of Ratti, all these stable partners, yes, they do, and they do it well. But when you have a new partner, you have to really be sure they master the story, or otherwise they could tell a story which is different or which is wrong. I remember, we don't work with them anymore, a partner many years ago, I don't say the name. There was a guy in the marketing department who wrote in a press release that we were providing, that product was made in a terrible slum, terrible conditions. We had to take people out to build the factory. That we were providing, the main thing is that we were providing babysitting for the babies of the community. And which is a beautiful thing, but it was not the main thing. By the way, we just built a kindergarten in one of our centers in Burkina Faso. We do these things, but it was not the main thing. Was that the mothers and the father had access to income, had a stable job, and then this made possible for them to pay for babysitting and all the rest, or to send kids to school And the main thing is that we were paying babysitting. So you have, that's another difficulty. Another difficulty, and it's probably the main one, is coping with the working environment in which we are. In a place where there is war or conflict or extreme poverty, logistics is more difficult. Trade can be disrupted. Communications can be disrupted. Transports can be disrupted. Work can be disrupted. There is violence, there is conflict, but there is also sickness. The malaria season in Burkina Faso, we are not productive. And we keep people with sprays, with you are less productive. So it's a situation, you have to organize your business model in order to get around these difficulties, these logistical difficulties, and to find a product that can be sold nevertheless, and to find work that can flow in a way or another, notwithstanding these difficulties. During the Ebola pandemic, we had adopted all the measures, all the protective measures immediately everywhere. And this is what helped us, by the way, in this pandemic. Because when this pandemic came, we had already all the systems in place of self-protection, of distancing, and all the rest.
It's fantastic. Hey, I think we've gotten through all of the questions that came in online. So I know that Trish has some other student questions.
Yeah, I do. So one of the questions I have is, how do you build trust with artisans as an outsider when you go into those communities?
Very good point. Super good point. They're all good questions today. So when you introduce yourself as somebody who would like to work with other people. And you need immediately to have a team of local people around you, because the work relationship is managed by local people with local people. And you have to be seen as somebody who brings about, me, Chloe, the main international team, somebody who brings about an opportunity, but it's an opportunity that has to be discussed, agreed upon together, and that can be modified according to what people think. Artisans have taught us to organize ourselves or to do things that we didn't think. By thinking, by exchanging, again, the dialogue, exchange is this. Even our ethical agenda, the code of conduct on the workplace, our code of conduct is always discussed with every single community. And the community says what they think about all the issues of the code of conduct. I think this, I think that, I would like to that. And then the code of conduct with the general, there are some general principles that are non-negotiable: no discrimination, empowerment of women, right? No child labor. This is not negotiable, but there are things that can be adjusted, and they get adjusted with the community. Then it's written on a large table and it's put in the workshop. And this is something that we have elaborated together. And it's the same for the costing. It's the same for the pricing. At the very beginning, there was a risk. We risked to be mistaken for, to be exchanged for NGOs or for charities, not for NGOs, for charities, for missionaries. There was a lot in the places where we worked, in those urban slums of Nairobi. There were a lot of missionaries who did a very good job, and charities who did a very good job, because charity is good. Charity is a noble thing of the humankind. But we were there to create work. It's a different line. It's a different thing. And so we simply wrote on the door of the place where we were, not charity, just work, which was not a way to disparage charity. I value charity, and I think charity is one of the noblest activities of the humankind. But it's to say, here we do another thing. Here we do another thing. So we are open to discuss it together. Discussions are long. Discussions may be maybe never ending. We are lucky because we work mainly with women. 90% of the artisans we work with are women. And therefore, things are more straightforward and more clear. With men, things are always a bit more complicated. Jim and I, we are two good men, and but we know very well that things are more complicated. Women are the backbone of the humankind. They have a practical approach that goes straight to the point because they look for a solution. This is my experience, at least. I don't want now to say it's like this to be normative, but it's my experience. And in the places where we work, this has helped a lot. Once we were in a big international meeting and in Mali, and we had invited all the management team of all our work in Burkina Faso, neighboring country. Management team, all women, all artisans. They own the business that we have created there. They came, 5 women from different parts of Burkina Faso. When it was their time to speak, they were so straight to the point and so clear that at the end, everybody was asking about who are they? These people are super, these are big managers. These were the ladies, the artisans who work with us. So it's always about, again, it's always about dialogue. It's about dialogue, it's about learning. I've learned a lot in my wandering around in Africa, in Afghanistan. I miss it dearly, dearly. I miss my small place in Ouagadougou. I miss the red soil on my shoes of the savannah. I miss it. I miss the dry dust in Herat in eastern Afghanistan, or the cold days in there in winter. I miss it. I miss it. I miss it. And I think Chloe misses that as much as me. But I miss people most of all. Because of this diet.
People too. I think we probably have time for one more question. Is that right, Trish? Before we do that, I do want to say one thing I've just been thinking about. And Simone, I think you will back me up on this. On this historic day of an election, I think I would really encourage, particularly our students, to stay engaged with politics and how much that impacts our industry, from the tariffs that people are paying on, silk coming from China, to manufacturing policies, to the Paris Climate Accord. All of these things are going to impact our industry at such a huge level. And that requires everyone to stay engaged with them at all levels. And that is my plea.
I couldn't agree more with that. How can I be sure that things are good for a human being like me who lives in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Do I go there and I bring, it's impossible, it's so far. The way to be sure about that is that this world is ruled by fair and just institutions. Mm-hmm. And that the institutions of my country, the institutions of my community are fine. Because if all the institutions are fine, are fair, are just, behave according to the rule of law, then some of these institutions will also take care of my fellow human being on the other side of the world. So being engaged in your society, in politics, is about being engaged for a better world. It's the first step. Politics, from the Greek politeia, which comes from a Greek word that means polis, the city, the city-state. The Greeks were organized in city-state. So your community was the polis, the city-state in which you lived. Politics meant being engaged in the society, politeia, of the polis, of the city-state in which you lived. And Aristoteles used to say, aner politikon zone, which meant the human being, he said the man, but because in those days they were male chauvinists and they said the man, not men and women. But men and women are social animals, engaged Engage, engage. L'engagement, like Jean-Paul Sartre used to say, l'engagement, Chloé, Chloé is French mother tongue, Japanese mother tongue. L'engagement. Engagez-vous. Mais qu'est-ce que vous faites là? Comme ça, chez vous, à la maison. No! Engage.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Do we have time for one more question? Trish, do you have a couple more? Or?
Yeah, there was just one. It sort of speaks because I love the fact that, you know, you give people work and they're self-sufficient. And I think this kind of speaks to, somebody was just asking about, you know, how much of your work is, you know, how much of the work that you produce is sold in Africa? I mean, how much is that prosperity shared amongst, you know, the people that are making it, their communities, or does it go? I think that's what it is.
That's another super good question. Bloody good question. Yeah, first of all what we produced benefits the place where it is produced, so Africa, Afghanistan, and so on, because of the salaries, because of the value addition there, because of the wealth created there. Now, we also work with some African designers, and we started working more with some African distributors, and we are in the process now of designing our first boutique in a Western African capital. And on top of that, and this is the work of Chloé, she could say something about this. Chloé manages an accelerator for African designers, and she has the first African designers she's accelerating in this accelerator, a business accelerator. And those people are the people through whom we will sell more also in the African market. Chloé, do you want to say something about our accelerator?
Sure. So we have 2 accelerators, but in total at the moment we have 8 designers from all over Africa. So we launched a call for proposal last June. We had about almost 300 applicants, and we selected a total of 8 young designers from Africa. So the requirement was that their brand or their company was registered in Africa, but also that they were producing there, that they were producing on the continent. So the accelerator is quite a full-rounded program, and we provide mentoring support going from accounting to business to production management to sourcing, marketing, social media, and we are planning an event that you will all be able to see if you continue to follow us, which will take place in June in Pitti, which is the main menswear business-to-business platform, which is in Florence. It will be 100% online and digital. So we're preparing a digital fashion show, but also a digital showroom. And yeah, so like Simone was saying, the main goal of the accelerator is to support these designers who are from Africa and who are also selling in Africa and producing in Africa, because we see them as also another vehicle to create jobs and to do good.
So you see, people don't know it, but we are also, in our complete madness, we are also theater producers. We have a theatrical play from Kabul to Bamako, which was staged in a beautiful theater in Brussels last year, and it was successful. And we are increasing, we are restructuring it. We want to stage it again, because theater is also a way to give work to the artisans for costumes, for scenographies and all the rest. And I hope one day we are able, in a new world, to take this theatrical play to the US.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Chloé, for sharing that too. I have a question for Simone and Chloé. What are you doing November 5th, 6th of 2021?
We are in Portland, Chloé, aren't we?
You put it on your calendar.
I think so.
We need to see you here live, which was our original plan, and you are both just so amazing, and your stories are wonderful, and we would be so honored to have you here in Portland.
Thank you.
Put it on your calendars, and I wish we
Such a pleasure.
Yeah, I know we can keep going, and these stories are fantastic. So I just want to thank you and let you go. You're several hours ahead, and it's on a Saturday. So thank you again for.
It's a huge pleasure being with you is a pleasure. I hope to see you all in person in November
If
2021.
people want to find you, is the best place the Ethical Fashion website? Is there any other way?
ethicalfashioninitiative.org.
Okay.
And our Instagram, Ethical Fashion, and then contact.
I'll share my email here in the chat box so all of the
Right.
participants can reach us.
Wonderful.
They
Thank you.
can reach us and all the rest, and let's be in touch.
Yes, and everyone stay tuned. We have a lunch and learn at 12:30. And if you missed Amy Cole on Thursday, she is super high energy and she's a professional coach and executive recruiter. So she's going to give tips for resume building and LinkedIn profiles and just getting professional tidbits. So join us for lunch for that.
If I was only 30 years younger, I would fly there and be one of the students immediately. It's such a cool program.
Simone, thank you so much for letting me pepper you with questions on a Saturday.
It's such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. A huge hug to you all, like this hug. Ooh.
I love it.
Take care, guys. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.